Hello, everyone, and welcome to the movie Changeup Bad Batch spoiler review. The episode today was called Rampage. I think there might be multiple reasons why it was named Rampage. Part of me thinks it might be a reference to another property. Tristan, kind of what were your thoughts on today's episode?
I had a good time with it. I think overall it was probably the weakest episode of this series so far, but that's only because we've had some really banger episodes so far in the season. It was a good time, but ultimately I don't know how much it furthered along the story, but that's fine. I mean, I was nice kind of here's a fun thing for them to do this week and very slightly move them forward along on their plot. So yeah, I had a good time with it, even if it won't be one that I look back on as like, oh, one of the great episodes of the show, probably.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's kind of where I am. I think it might be this or last week's episode that might be my least favorite. But one thing I want to do is if you are watching a video version of this review, you might see in the background on Tristan's TV, he's got the episode one brought up, and that's because after this review, on a separate stream, we are going to do a Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace drink along, where we have four rules and we kind of, drink as the movie progresses, and by the end it might become a total shit show depending on how we approached our rules. But we'll get into that when the stream starts. We're gonna basically, if you're watching us live, we're gonna go basically right from this into that with maybe about a 10-minute break in between. We're planning on starting that around 8 o'clock. But yeah, I thought this episode was really solid. I kind of, on par with like a typical Clone Wars or Rebels episode. Like it was towards the lower end of this series, but this series has only had 5 episodes, and I still quite enjoyed it. Tristan, do you want to do kind of a general moment by moment breakdown? Did you take notes on this episode?
Yeah, I took some notes in the episode. We can go through a bit of uh, this, the notes here, but I want to get a note before we start about the structure here. We're getting this kind of basic connection to the plot in the early scenes here. That okay, we got to figure out who hired this bounty hunter, so we're gonna go to someone that might know who, and they say, oh, we have this thing you got to do for us, and then we'll help you out. You're like almost like a Mandalorian kind of structure to it, where it's like, oh, we can do that thing you want us to do for you, but you got to do this other thing for us first, and then you get this kind of like adventure of the week style thing. So I want to get your thoughts. Is that going to be kind of the structure we see throughout the whole season? Like, oh, we got to find who hired this bounty hunter, let's go to another connection we have and see how that goes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of adventure of the week with a little bit of backstory dropped in. Like I think next week's episode we might get a little bit more with Crosshair or something like that, and then the episode after we might get a little bit more on who hired Fennec Shand.
Yeah, I like that there's these loose connections here. It doesn't quite feel like just random adventure of the week type thing. Like Clone Wars had that problem for me sometimes, where it's like, oh, we're jumping into this random thing on the other side of the galaxy, and you got to kind of play catch up to figure out what's going on. And this feels like you have this through line of like, okay, they interacted with Fennec Shand last week, and now this week they're trying to figure out who hired her, and that's kind of just like the way to make you feel like you're being rewarded and you're following this plot, even in stories like this that are kind of just standalone, fun adventure kind of things.
Yeah, to me, like a lot of times when people talk about like a filler episode of a show, to me that's more of an episode that you could have made that season 2 episode 5 or season 3 episode 8 and like no one would have noticed. But so far with this show, like it's had to have been in the order it's come out. Like we learn a little bit more each episode. So if you had switched this episode on the last episode, people would have noticed. People would have been like, this doesn't make sense. So
There's through lines with the characters and stuff like that that bring you between these episodes. Like Omega is kind of trying to find a place in the team last week, and now this week she's been given her own transponder, and she still has struggles with getting her place among the Bad Batch, but she's still a member of the team, and that wouldn't make sense if you'd watch this out of the context of last week's episode.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And they mentioned this character Sid before we get to her, and they mentioned that the Jedi had interacted with Sid before, and somehow that the Jedi is what led the Bad Batch to this place. So clearly the Jedi had either worked with Sid before or had her as like a person of interest. So how much do you think the Jedi interacted with this character? Is this supposed to imply, oh, the Jedi had this kind of dark side too? They worked with these kind of darker, seedier kind of characters too.
I mean, part of me, honestly, when they were talking about like, oh, the Jedi had this person, part of me kind of expected either Dexter Jetster from episode 2 or Hondo, like when they were kind of being a little secretive of who this character would be. So it wasn't, I don't think it's like too out of the ordinary or too crazy from anything we've seen before, especially in the movies. Like you could take Sid out and replace it with Dexter Jetster and everything still fits and everything still makes sense. And if you don't know who Dexter Jetster is, it's the guy who ran the 50s diner in Attack of the Clones that Obi-Wan goes to, and he's like, Camino Saber Darts, that guy.
Yeah, the guy who has a random American diner in the middle of space.
Yeah, in the middle of Coruscant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a good move to not have this be yet another character that crossed over. I think we've had a few crossover characters so far, and there was another one towards the end of the episode, but I think it would have been a little bit of an overkill if it was, oh, this is Hondo, or oh, this is somebody else.
Yeah, I have my theory on some of what's going on in the background of this episode and maybe the last episode.
Yeah, we'll get to that towards the end, and they have a couple of theories. Even for a later episode, I feel like some of my theories got a little bit of juice here, but let's move forward a bit. We get a task, essentially, from... So I'll go through this scene really quick with Omega, where they go into this bar where they know Sid is supposed to be, and the Bad Batch is like, oh, where is Sid? We gotta find Sid, and of course, the person who is very obviously Sid is like, oh, I don't know who Sid is. Never heard of them. And Omega is the one of the whole Bad Batch who's able to be like, hey, maybe this person's actually Sid.
Yeah, I like the Yoda moment. Like anytime there's a character in Star Wars where they're looking for somebody, and then this weird kooky person's like, yeah, I don't really know, never heard of them, don't know what you're talking about, and then boom, it's the guy. And I also want to add, Sid is voiced by Rhea Perlman, iconic kind of TV, somewhat film actress, wife of Danny DeVito. And so that now puts us at 3 actors from Cheers who have been in Star Wars. And I just wanted to round them out. Put them all in. Kirstie Alley, I want to see her as like a off-world bartender. I want to see, I just want to see everybody from Cheers.
Yeah, we've got some room for some bounty hunters in Mandalore, to give us some cool scenes, I could see that. Cross it over. We've got plenty of shows now coming up, 10 shows in Star Wars coming. You can find roles for them.
Yeah.
But this is also the first time that not the first time, but it's one of the many times, honestly, that we've seen Omega have this intuition towards people, and they're obviously leaning into that a lot, and they've repeated it so many times throughout these episodes that I feel like it's definitely an intentional thing, whether it's actually the Force and whether it's supposed to be hinting that she has this Force sensitivity, or whether it's just, oh, well, Omega is the kind, caring member of the team who's able to think things through and not just be kind of a brute force.
Yeah, I think it could be the Force, and I also have a theory of what else it could potentially be, but we'll get into our theory. We always save our theory predictions for the end of the show, and we'll save it for there. But I have an idea. I think I'm like 50-50. It's either one or the other. The Force.
And I'm curious to hear what your theory is. But they get a mission essentially from Sid, where they're going to rescue a young kid who he turned out to be a creature that we might recognize, and their plan is to go rescue him from these slave traders. So we get kind of a nice adventure set up here. A nice adventure set up here. We're gonna go into this kind of like run out town square and rescue this kid. Nice little action setup. Do you have any thoughts on the premise of this moment here?
Yeah, it's kind of cool going back to Ord Mantell, which was in a arc of the Clone Wars, which, it was a big slave trade planet in that arc of the Clone Wars, so it makes sense to go back there. But one of the things when they're like, oh, we gotta go rescue Moochie, and number one, it was a Twi'lek that sent him that message, and I'll give what I was thinking was happening in the moment. We couldn't really see the Twi'lek that well, and they're like, oh, I need you to rescue Moochie. And my first thought of who that Twi'lek would be is Cham Syndulla, and so I thought they were gonna be rescuing a young Hera. And then when they showed like the little green character whose species I don't remember, but it's the same species as the Black Sun Syndicate, I'm like, I knew immediately that wasn't Moochie, because in that moment I still thought they might be rescuing a young Hera, but clearly that's not the direction they went. But then when like that character didn't talk and there was like no connection to that character, and that character, like if that was who they were supposed to rescue, like from storyline wise, immediately when they got to her, they would have had the conversation and she would have been like, oh my god, you're here to rescue me, blah blah blah. But when they got next to her and she still didn't say anything, I'm like, okay, that's definitely not who they're here for.
Yeah, I thought it was a nice, fun setup. I didn't real I knew that this is a connection to the Clone Wars. I wasn't quite sure like how. I didn't look up the research of when this was in the Clone Wars and what season it was or
Yeah,
anything
I
like
don't
that, or
either.
how prominent.
I just when they said Ord Mantell, I recognized the name and I googled it, and then yeah, it was.
I have to go back and do a rewatch. We're starting our Phantom Menace rewatch, like you mentioned, so I might be doing a whole Clone Wars
Yeah.
binge. I might catch more of these connections out. I haven't watched that since pretty much it was on TV, so it's been a while. But this is also the first time that the Bad Batch are directly referred to as mercenaries, and you're the one who's been saying this whole time, oh, they're going to be mercenaries, they're going to be mercenaries. So you finally got your wish granted here. They're
Yeah.
officially hired as mercenaries, and it seems like by the end they're going to be doing this for a few more missions at least.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're going to be mercenaries kind of throughout the show. I don't think they're going to be like working maybe ever directly for a group or ever directly for like a guild. I think it's just going to be side missions here and there, but I think that's kind of how the show was pitched, is these characters going off and being mercenaries. I think they're going to be kind of like the A team, where they just go and they do these random things, maybe help people as they see them. I don't think they're ever going to be like full guild members or anything.
Yeah, I think it's a nice way to have them be these kind of on the outside of good and bad kind of characters, and it almost feels to me like what Mandalorian was seeming like it was going to be like. Oh, here's going to be Din Djarin, and he's going to go on these missions, and he's going to be kind of hired with some questionable people sometimes. Maybe have to do one or two things that might not be great, but then maybe he's going to save some kid one mission or do something good in the next mission. And this feels a bit like what I was hoping Mandalorian would
Yeah.
be out of the first season. So I'm looking forward to just them going on these meeting new characters, going to new worlds. So that's what I like about these Star Wars series. They get a chance to
Yeah.
see new places, meet new creatures, that kind of stuff. Okay, let's move on a little bit here. We have a moment where Omega's scoping out ahead of them on the team here, and then she's of course sent back to the ship. They say, "Okay, thank you for helping, and now go back to the ship where you're safe." So we still have this kind of conflict of Omega wants to be out in the front line, doing some action,
Yeah.
leading the charge, but she's still being protected by Hunter and still being sent back to the ship, and they have that kind of conflict still going on between what is her role in this team, how prominent is she going to be, and how much of it is she still a kid? It's
Yeah.
still someone needing to be protected.
Yeah, especially because I assume she has that same accelerated growth rate as all of the other clones. So I think that could be an interesting dynamic for the show. Because I would imagine, is like 11 or 12 this season. Well, next season she should be like 12 or 14. We get to season 3, she should be like 16, 17 years old. So I think that's an interesting dynamic we could see that other shows really can't do, is like time. Each season is a year, but she's progressing 2 years at a time. So
Yeah, I would like that a lot. I know in Rebels, it was kind of interesting to see how much Ezra evolved and grew up a bit between each season. Like they just evolved his look and darkened matured his character a little bit each time. So if you give us that accelerated growth, that's an excuse to do that. And so this animation, you don't got to worry about like, oh, how do we recast? Do we do like a got to bring in a new actor? You can just have
well,
the same person
I don't
do
think
the
the
voice pretty
actress
much.
is. Yeah, especially because I don't think the actress is like 11 or 12. I think the actress is like an adult woman, so she can voice the character.
Yeah,
Each
that's the
season.
joy of these animated shows. You're not worrying about having to recast a bunch
Yeah.
of characters every time they change or something like that.
And one thing I wanted your opinion on, I just drew a blank on what it was. Oh, one of the things I wanted to say is we've seen her so much with Hunter and Wrecker. I'd love for there to be an episode where she's like with Echo and Tech the entire episode, because I can't remember a single time where she's like talked to either of them. And like she has that, father-daughter relationship with Hunter and that uncle-niece kind of relationship with Wrecker. I'd love for her just to like be on the mission or part of the mission with Echo and Tech. I think that would be interesting just to have them interact at all.
Yeah, I would like that too because Echo and Tech aren't necessarily like frontline characters either. Not just with their relationship with Omega, but at least in this show, we haven't seen a ton of Echo really, and not much Tech either. So it would be nice to just get them kind of standalone episodes and a little bit of time to spend with them.
Yeah, I did.
That's one thing that I think will be missing with this structure here is if we're following a general through line the whole time, we might not have a chance to get these offshoot episodes where it's like, oh, Tech and Echo go out to this random place and do their own thing.
But we could still have an episode where they split up and Hunter and Wrecker go do one thing and Echo and Tech go do another, and for some reason or another, Omega finds herself with Echo and Tech. But one thing I do want to add is I like there was a small moment where Echo puts on his helmet and you can see how it forms around like his back skull piece where the backside like comes down behind it. I thought that was kind of cool.
That is cool. Yeah, Mitch, I like that moment. I think we talked about it a lot, but the animation has just gotten so great.
Yeah.
Just a little attention to detail, those little tiny things like that, where you think like, okay, how would he put his helmet on? And then you got to figure that out. Like a different show, like this is a kid show, sure, but that's the stuff that makes a difference. Like they pay attention to that kind of stuff, and they have that level of creativity. Where a different show would just be like, oh, who cares? Just have him with the helmet on next shot or whatever. But this gives you that little moment to make it worth it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so the Bad Batch, they show up, they think it's going easy. They're like, all right, easy money, let's take this quest, easy mode quest, get the XP and run away. But it doesn't go too easy for them. They get ambushed and they're captured. And once again, Omega's the one that's kind of put in a situation where she's separated from everybody else who is now at her disposal to be saved or left.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought, I'm warming on Omega. At first, I thought she was like a little Mary Sue-ish, but especially with my theory I'm cooking up here, I'm kind of digging what she is so far. And they kind of, I would like an episode though where she is actually like put in a corner and she needs help. Because right now it's more just like she does stuff and it mostly works. Or I'd at least like to see one episode where she struggles and, has to have help from the Bad Batch to come help her out.
She has a little bit of help. She has a gonk droid.
I want more from
predicted
Gonky.
maybe that gonk droid is Gonky. Maybe Gonky's going to be another prominent character.
Yeah,
I've always kind of had a soft spot for those kind of characters.
Yeah, I'd love to see more from Gonky than just being like Wrecker's free weights. Anytime Wrecker's in the ship, he's just like lifting Gonky and working out with Gonky.
Yeah.
So I just want to see more from him other than just kind of being heavy.
Yeah, release the Gonky cut. We got to get some Gonky-centered episodes.
Yeah.
At least a few that are just Gonky with no dialogue for the entire episode.
That's you, not me. I would like dialogue in my episode. I would just like maybe maybe in that Echo and Tech-centric episode, Gonky goes with them.
I'm down for that. That's a nice compromise, I think. I put a little heart here, or a Gonky with heart, so I wanted to let you know that I was into Gonky on there. We've hit in a bit of a formulaic wall here, I think, where Omega's always ends up in the spot. You mentioned it a bit, where she's the one who has to save the day, and she kind of doesn't really have any. Maybe she'll struggle, but she ultimately kind of wins it out. A lot of danger to her, but I don't know how long they can repeat that for. I do think we're going to slowly start getting away from it as she's more and more part of the crew. I don't think we're going to get in these moments where she's cast aside, then has to prove herself, and cast aside, and has to prove herself. I think eventually she's going to prove herself, but she's going to be part of the team. And that's what I'm hoping for, at least by the end of like the middle of the season. That's what I'm hoping to get.
Yeah, especially because you have that little moment of her. It's kind of her talking about herself, but when she makes her doll and she's like, oh, and like did it up different, and it's like, oh, look, she's she's a Bad Batcher now. It's like she's talking about the doll, but she's partially talking about herself as well. And she got a weapon, which is cool. That bow that I think that we've seen a lot in the promo material. We finally figured out how she got it. I thought it was going to be a little bit more interesting and exciting besides she just like picked it up off the ground, but I'll take it. She's got it now, so
yeah, it's kind of cool. It could be a nice moment if she ends up using that bow prominently through like 3, 4, 5 seasons of the show. That could be like, oh, this epic character moment. We look back on and be like, oh, here's where she finally got that bow.
Yeah.
Now we get to the moment I think I've been waiting for. Wrecker fights the Rancor. What else do you guys set up? The Rancor bursts out, and we get this. I was ready for some kind of like epic Batman v Superman fight between the two of them.
I like the war of attrition. I thought it was kind of cool how they just fought until the Rancor and Wrecker just couldn't take it anymore, and they both just kind of passed out. I thought that was funny. I enjoyed it. I thought it was different and interesting. I'm all about the war of attrition.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny. When he burst out, I was like, oh, we're going to get some really cool, like, 1v1 battle here, and I was ready for that. And then they subverted that, and it was like, oh, they're just going to get to, like, a stalemate, essentially. They're going to both get so tired they pass out, and I thought that was a really fun subversion of what I thought for sure was coming to get me there. And
And,
if we nothing else, Star Wars is like subverting expectations.
yeah.
It's a big part of some of the Star Wars movies.
Yeah, I will say I thought potentially when they were like, oh, like they have a hierarchy culture and it was about whoever like beats it, and I thought there might be like a force connection thing with Omega, and that might be how it submits or something like that, and then it would kind of be like Omega's pet for the rest of the episode. But I do like this different turn of just Wrecker and it going toe to toe until they both fall over.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. I'm really liking Wrecker. I know
Yeah.
you're the big Wrecker fan of the podcast,
Yeah.
but he's definitely been growing on me every episode.
Yeah, I will say, and I was gonna say the title episode Rampage. I thought with the animals running around fighting each other, part of that might be a reference to the video game franchise.
That's what I was thinking too.
And I thought, I mean, I don't really know how else it makes sense. I mean, obviously the animals are out rampaging around, but usually a lot of these episode titles are like 2 or 3 levels deep, and this one it was just kind of like, yeah, these animals are rampaging around like the video game Rampage.
Yeah, I thought it was funny, and like in Rampage, there's that fun element of like you can fight the other characters, so it's like maybe the two guys fighting at the end is like, oh, it's a reference to Rampage, like
Yeah.
George fighting. I don't remember the other characters' names.
Yeah. Yeah,
Macy, I don't know.
I don't know. I didn't play it until the movie came out, which to me is still the best video game movie of all time, but it's a very, very, very low bar.
Yeah, I had a lot of time playing that along with my Star Wars Lego games and like the Revenge of the Sith fighting game, but Rampage was definitely among the mix of my games on GameCube. I think I had the GameCube version.
Yeah.
But a great, really fun action scene at the end subverts the way it ends. But then we get another kind of connective tissue here where it shows up Bib Fortuna, and they have this conversation where we realize that this was a job hired for Bib Fortuna and for Jabba the Hutt to get this rancor for them. And the Bad Batch, whether they knew it or not, just worked for Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I mean, we're at the end of the episode. I think it's, theory time for the most part.
Sounds like it.
And I can drop my theory of what I think. So a lot of people are like, oh, that's the Rancor Luke killed. Well, this Rancor was called Moochie and I think was a female. The Rancor in Return of the Jedi, according to the Aftermath books, name was like Patisse or something like that. Something not Moochie at all. And was a male. And so my theory is Book of Boba Fett, they want Boba Fett to have a Rancor, but Luke already killed one. So this is, I think, the origin story for the Rancor that we are going to see in Book of Boba Fett.
I like that theory, taking it an extra level, because when I first watched this scene, I thought, oh wow, they're really going to try and make it out to be like this character from Return of the Jedi. That's going to be the dumbest shit. And then I was like, I swear that was mentioned in one of the other books. There's like an origin story to this Rancor, and then I did look it up a bit. I didn't look up the details of it, but I did look up the name, and I was like, oh yeah, they were mentioned in Aftermath by this name. So either, like they've done before, they just said, okay, no, we're doing our version, and they're throwing out whatever they don't like they did for the Kanan comic, or they're doing something like you said, they're setting it up so you can have it either way.
To me, the thing with the Kanan comic is I can at least understand why they would make those changes, because it's like, hey, we're telling our story, like it might conflict a little bit. Like you could see how it might mesh together in here. But with this, there's no, if that's what they wanted to do, but throw it off a little bit, they could come up with like a nickname, right, that you could see how it would come from Batiste, and then you could still make it the same gender, right? Like they could call it like Patty, like, oh, we need to go rescue this little person, this child named Patty. And like fans who read the Aftermath book and who have the entire book memorized would not think, oh, Patty is Batiste, the baby Rancor from Return of the Jedi, until it's revealed. And then you could be like, okay, I could understand why they would call it Patty. Patty could just be a nickname, blah, blah, blah. There's no reason to change the name unless you just actively want to make fans angry. So I'm going, unless the canon material that comes out on Monday says otherwise, I'm going to say this is not the same Rancor, and I think this is going to be the setup for the Rancor that Boba Fett has in the Book of Boba Fett when he's running out of Jabba's palace.
I hope you're right. I think for multiple reasons, I think it's a cool setup and to be that thing from Boba Fett, and then I think it also would be interesting because I just don't like having like unnecessarily amounts of connections. Like that's such a coincidence. That's not something that makes sense in the plot. That's like, oh, randomly this random Rancor that Bad Batch ran into is also the one that Luke fought. Like that feels like some like fan fiction level
Yeah.
storytelling.
Yeah, I think with Fennec Shand in the last episode, who we know runs into Boba Fett, Bib Fortuna in this episode, who obviously we also know runs into Boba Fett, I think a lot of, at least season 1 of the Bad Batch, is going to have a lot of Book of Boba Fett set up.
I'm hoping
And
so. I
like
think it'll be
prequelness
fun.
to it, where you don't necessarily need to watch the Bad Batch to enjoy Book of Boba Fett, but Boba Fett like throws someone in his Rancor pit in what was Jabba's palace, and he's like, "Oh, feed him to Moochie." We're gonna be like, "Oh shit, that's the same Rancor that the Bad Batch rescued," and like you don't need to know that to enjoy Book of Boba Fett, but it just makes you enjoy it that much more.
Yeah, I'd be a fan of that. I think connected history like that is fun, where it's like you don't need to know it, but if you do, you do. And
Yeah.
I think that what's interesting too about this Rancor scene, before we move on to something else, is that I think it's light enough that if you just watch the movies and then watch this show, you could be like, "Oh, cool! It's the Rancor from the movie," and
Yeah.
you're not like missing out on anything. You just
Yeah, I was gonna say
you
that too.
you get that still where you get the connective tissue without having to do the extra level of research. You're like, oh look, it's Bit Fortuna, I know who that is, and you're like, oh, it must be the Rancor. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then little
And
known to you, there's all this retconning going on in the background of why that's actually not what it is, and this is what it is, and that's kind of the fun of Star Wars is the details don't matter, but they kind of do. Like they don't matter to the on the surface level, but if you really want to, you can dig into them.
Yeah, like if you're, I mean, I guess with Solo that's not so much, but like, yeah, if you're a movie only person, Obi-Wan killed Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace. But if you like the more expanded canon, then Obi-Wan killed Darth Maul like on Tatooine like 3 years before A New Hope.
Yeah, and even if you don't know that, you watch Solo and you're like, "Oh, look, Maul's alive. That's cool."
Yeah.
And you don't miss out. I mean, you miss out on some great character work, but
Yeah.
you're not lost.
Yeah, for sure. All right, do you
And that's pretty much the whole episode. I've got
Yeah.
it all. The one last thing we didn't mention is just a little bit of setup, I think, where they're reuniting with Sid, the Bad Batch, and
Yeah.
that she says, "Oh, I got a lot more work for you," and she gives him a bunch of credits and they're like, "Oh, we'll think about it. We're not sure about doing the mercenary work or whatever is implied," and then she kind of blackmails him and says, "Oh, the Empire is looking for you guys. You got a high-profile bounty hunter looking for you guys. I got to keep your secret." And you get this implication that they're going to be working for her, even though they might not want to be.
Yeah, and if we want to go into theories, I go back in what I said last week, and I have my theory on who hired Fennec Shand.
Go for it.
I think it's one of two people. I think it's either Cad Bane or I think it's Boba Fett, and I think we will be getting the final showdown between Cad Bane and Boba Fett that was originally set to appear in the Clone Wars, but it got canceled because of the Disney acquisition, and then they just didn't have the time or the episodes to put it into the season 7 of the Clone Wars. So I think Dave Filoni will switch things around and put that final showdown in the Bad Batch, and I think it's either Cad Bane hired Fennec Shand, and that's gonna introduce Cad Bane into this show, and then eventually he's gonna fight Boba Fett, or it was just Boba Fett himself, and then maybe Cad Bane will find himself looking for the Bad Batch as well. But yeah, I think it was either, I go back on what I said before, I think it was either Cad Bane or Boba Fett, because I did say it was the Kaminoans, but now they're hyping it up too much for me to be like, I think it's the Kaminoans.
I think something this episode did interesting is that it checked off a box of who it might be. Because when you think of like, okay, who hired her, and you have like a whole list of people who might do it, Jabba the Hutt's on that list somewhere. And this episode, I think in my mind, checked off that it probably wasn't him, because they would have she showed up and had that scene at the end that wouldn't really line up for it to also have been Boba Fett that hired Fennec Shand. So I think it's be interesting if maybe next week we get another like, oh, here's suspicious number 2, and we find out it's not them. But I like the Cad Bane and Boba Fett prediction. If I was Filoni, I'd be tempted to hold that off to the Book of Boba Fett. Give us a Cad Bane live action debut, and then give us that final showdown in live action.
Well, I know in Legends, to an extent, like a book came out like while Clone Wars was happening, and then Clone Wars kind of retconned that. Is essentially there was always this kind of known rivalry between Cad Bane and Jango Fett of who is the better bounty hunter. So when Jango Fett died, Cad Bane trained Boba Fett in all the ways of the bounty hunter, because Boba Fett was the closest thing to Jango, so he could eventually have a showdown with Boba Fett to figure out who the best bounty hunter was. So I don't want like old man Cad Bane versus old man Boba Fett. I want like Pete Cad Bane versus like on the rise Boba Fett.
That's a good point. You don't. I don't know if the old man Boba Fett is technically. Well, we saw some good action from him.
Yeah, we saw a good fight action from him, but then Cad Bane is that much older. Even though it'd be an animation, I'd much prefer this to happen in Book of Boba Fett, and it's not in Book of Boba Fett, in the Bad Batch over Book of Boba Fett.
I'm still on the mind that the bounty hunter was hired by Palpatine himself, and that he's hunting down Omega as one of his many children of the Force that he's looking for. Either that, or there actually is a DNA connection between Palpatine and Omega, which I'm not totally sure on whether or not she's a clone of Palpatine or not. I think that would be a fun, wild kind of Star Wars twist, but I don't know if they're going to go that far. I don't think they want to, like you said, they want people to be able to watch just the movies and not be confused. So I think if you end up explaining too much stuff in these shows, it's just going to become confusing. When you watch this compared to Boba Fett compared to Mandalorian, people need to be able to watch just the one thing and not be confused.
Yeah. So is that your final Omega prediction? Because I have another Omega prediction to throw into the ring.
I guess that's it. I'm leaning towards Palpatine clone. I'll probably say 60-40 on my mind of whether or not she's a Palpatine clone. Maybe not 100% Palpatine, but maybe like a 50% Palpatine, 50% somebody else. I don't know, but I'm thinking Palpatine clone, and that's why she's Force sensitive. She has some of the Palpatine's midichlorians in there,
Yeah, I say it's potentially Force sensitive, but I wouldn't say it would be Palpatine's blood. My theory would be, if they were to say someone other than Jango's blood is in there, my theory would be Obi-Wan from Attack of the Clones, as they somehow got his DNA. But my theory that I'm going to throw in there, her picking up the bow made me realize something, is she has to be pretty decent with that bow. Like, really good with that bow. So my prediction that I'm throwing in the ring is that I'm still 50% she's Force sensitive. My other 50% saying is they figured out all of the anomalies that made the Bad Batch of like the DNA, like the genetics that made Hunter a good tracker, the one that made Tech smart, the one that made Wrecker strong, the one that made Crosshair have that, and they figured out what all of those are, and instead of letting them happen on accident, they figured out a way to make them all happen on purpose, and Omega has all 4 of their abilities.
I like that. That's a really cool theory. I think that's very interesting. I like that more than the Palpatine clone theory.
If she has that bow and she's shooting it with deadly accuracy from the start, I'm going to be like 70-30 that's what Omega is, and that it's not that she's Force sensitive. But then there's that whole thing with Wrecker, that if Wrecker didn't keep having those goddamn headaches that are the chip in his head, if he didn't keep having those headaches, I would be like way more on Omega not being Force sensitive. But I think eventually that Order 66 thing is going to activate in his head, and he's going to go after Omega, and it has to be because she's Force sensitive. But I just think part of me thinks it would be kind of cool if she had all of the Bad Batch's abilities and they were put in her on purpose instead of on accident like they were with the Bad Batch.
Hey, Joe, why not do both? I do think Omega in some way or another is an altered clone, and I think whether it's altered to have the Force sensitivity or whether it's altered to have all these different abilities, and then maybe it's both. Maybe she has all these abilities, plus they gave her some midichlorians to see what would happen, and that could be interesting. Maybe the midichlorian thing is a Palpatine idea. I think that Omega's going to tie a lot into that kind of lore, and I think both of our theories have a lot of merit. I think yours is more interesting a bit. I think I like mine because I think it might be the direction they go, and I would love to see them do some sequel course correcting in this show. But I think yours is very interesting, and I think I really like the way that it would play into her being connected to all these clones and her being like the Omega of their experiments.
And my thing too with the Empire not knowing about Omega, it makes it hard for me to believe that it's like Palpatine's DNA and he was partially behind the creation of Omega. If they want to do like some episode 9 retconning like you were talking about, and she's Force sensitive, I'd much rather have like the Battle of Kamino happen and everything goes down. Palpatine and Tarkin and maybe Vader roll up on Kamino and start looking at their files. And they could do it in a way that's more visually appealing than 3 guys staring at a computer. And they find out about Omega and that Kamino made a genetically engineered clone. And that's what starts sparking ideas in Palpatine's head.
I do think that's a good idea because I think Palpatine needs to find that clone technology, and I think ultimately that's why he's looking for Omega one way or another. He needs her to be able to get his new clone, and how are they gonna? Because I still couldn't tell you how he's alive in Rise of Skywalker. I know they've explained it in the book, but I mean it didn't make much sense to me.
That's if I could change anything with Episode 9, like I have problems with that movie, and we might talk a little bit about it during our Phantom Menace watch along because there are connections throughout. But I would say the number one thing they had to do, if you were going to bring Palpatine back, you have to explain how. You can't have a moment that big and just be like, yeah, it happened. Moving on. Like, no, we're not going to move on. You're going to explain what this is because when everyone walks out with like a different idea of how the main villain of the movie came back from the dead in one of the most iconic movie deaths of all time, you can't just be like, yeah, it happened. The Force, dark side. Don't worry about it.
We'll just quote the prequels and we'll be good.
It's like, no, you're gonna explain this. Give us a flashback of what happened.
I have one final prevailing theory that I've just made up now for Omega and where she might have gotten her midichlorians. If it's not Palpatine, we know that Sifo Dyas was directly involved in the creation of Camino cloning. It could be a fun twist. Maybe either he donated his DNA in the beginning intentionally, or there was some way the Kaminoans got his DNA, or maybe he was involved in some way in that process. That would be a fascinating twist and a nice ass pull because that's what I love to see them do in the show. Just like, oh, remember that one random line from that one movie? Like, that's important now.
Yeah, that one typo of George Lucas had is now the inspiration for like this whole thing. Yeah, if anyone watching that doesn't know, the character of Sifo Dyas, which was originally going to be Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, which was Palpatine's like fake Jedi name that he used to get the clones. But then George Lucas made a typo and accidentally wrote Sifo Dyas, and he's like, yeah, let's go with that. So anyone that says Star Wars was planned out from the beginning, it was not. But yeah, I could see that, and I think it would they could either through flashback or through explanation, partially explain how the whole clone army came to be, because they've explained it, but it's super confusing. Sifo Dyas had a premonition through the Force that there was going to be a big galactic-style war, and he knew the Jedi didn't have the numbers or the support, so he went to the Jedi Council and said, hey, we need like an army, like let's get a clone army. And the Jedi Council was like, nah, we don't need it, there's no war, you're talking nonsense. And then Sifo Dyas goes to the clones, goes to the Camino, commissions an army, and then he dies not long after. And then Palpatine and Dooku hear about this clone army being built, and they kind of use that to their advantage, and they kind of helps spark the war. But it doesn't really make sense because they know about it, and I don't know, but they could find a way to help make it make sense because it kind of doesn't.
Yeah, I like that this show, we've mentioned it before, but they could have like a couple lines, and then just 2 lines that can fix a whole huge problem in a movie, and I think it's an art that Dave Filoni is mastered really well. So I would like to see him take on that question of how exactly did this clone army come to be, and what was Palpatine's plan with this clone army, and does that tie into his revival in Episode 9, and what exactly is going on here?
Yeah, I think
we'll see.
Just like Catalyst, I think part of the reason, or like a large reason the book Catalyst exists, which is a prequel to Rogue One, explains how the Death Star went from the Separatist hands to the Empire's hands, which technically was the opposite side of the war. I mean, both were run by dark side people, but it still helps explain on the business background side of thing how it switched hands. So yeah,
we talked a bit about the episode. I feel like we got any last theories or comments here, Joe?
Before we end the stream and start our Phantom Menace watch along, which I want to start right at 8:00. I just wanted to do a rundown. I don't know if you were ever much of a Cheers fan, but I've been thinking about this all day because originally because I for whatever reason thought Tristan worked today and that he wouldn't have time for the Phantom Menace watch along. I was thinking, what will be our topic for the day? Like, what's going to be the thing we talk about after this episode? And this episode really didn't offer anything, and much of anything we haven't talked about before. And with Rhea Perlman voicing Sid, and then we have John Ratzenberger, who's in Empire Strikes Back, and then Woody Harrelson as Beckett in Solo. It's 3 Cheers actors, and I'm like, who would I want to see the other Cheers actors play in Star Wars? Like, what kind of character? So I'm gonna just start off with Ted Danson. I want to see him as like a more villainous type of grief karga. I want to see him running like his own team of bounty hunters, but he's a lot more malicious. He's a lot more evil. He doesn't care about civilians. Like, if you're in his way, you're gonna die. He doesn't care.
I would love
if you're
to
a
see
little
Ted
kid.
Danson. I'd love to see Ted Danson as like a Tarkin type, where he's like the ruthless, like political leader. That would be pretty fun, side by side with like a Darth Vader or a Kylo Ren. He's like this intense figure.
Yeah.
I'd love to see him play a villain role like that.
Yeah, like a Dooku type, like a Old Republic Dooku type. I think could be cool too.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is George Wendt, who everyone knows as Norm. I can't not see him as Norm, so I'd love for him just to be like some drunk guy at the end of a bar, but he can be like an alien. You know, he could be like a Gamorrean guard, but like a drunk Gamorrean guard at the end of a bar. That's what I want.
Yeah, maybe have him be like a bartender at a cantina somewhere, you know, or like a passed out of the corner of the Masaza cantina. One of those kind of guys.
Yeah, and for Kelsey Grammer, who played Frasier, I see him as like an Imperial. Like, that's what I want. He's just like this. He's not like overtly evil like Tarkin, but he's more just like, this is the side I support. This is who I think the Empire knows what they're doing, and I think the Empire is the winning side, so that's the side I'm on. Kind of Imperial, almost like an Agent Callus, like an Agent Callus type, before he turned to the light side or the good.
Interesting. Yeah, like a Tywin Lannister. He's like, I'm only gonna put my flag down when I know who's winning.
Yeah, exactly. And then Kirstie Alley, I just see her as like a bartender, like a nighttime bartender. Like, you there and you got problems, that's who you talk to.
I like that.
Talk to Kirstie.
Maybe like a Sid type. I would see her as like a Sid type.
Exactly.
Not as problematic as Sid maybe, but like, you know, she knows the people, she got the connections. She might be a little shady sometimes on the nights, you know, but if you need something done, she's the person you go to.
And then we got two more. I was going to say Shelley Long, who we just talked about in our movie Changeup podcast, because she played Olive Oil in Popeye. But for Shelley Long, I think I see her as like a female C-3PO. Like, I want her to play like a same type of droid as C-3PO, but just the female version of it. This super high-strung, loud, kind of annoying droid that you hope just goes away.
I would see her. What was the character's Holdo from The Last Jedi? Something
Oh,
like that.
Admiral Holdo, yeah.
Yeah, I could see her as like that, like the kind of prickly military commander, but heart in the right place kind of character. That could be fun.
And then finally, Nick Colasanto as Coach. I just want him to be like a Jedi that you're like, you are the dumbest person I've ever met. Like, how are you a Jedi? Like, he's like, I see him as like 70 years old and still a Padawan. Like, that's what I want.
Yeah, he's just been doing it, you know. They're like, hey, are we gonna become a master? And he's like, nah, man, I'm just hanging out.
He's on his third master because the previous three have just died of old age.
Yeah, they just given up.
And I see it like a sitcom type of thing. So that's what I want. I want Nick Colasanto
passed along. They're like, God, one day he's gonna graduate. He's like a Billy Madison or something, or Adam Sandler. Yeah,
where he has to go back, but he's just still there. He's just still a Padawan, but everyone likes him too much to like kick him out.
Yeah, I could see that.
All right, so yeah, that kind of ends our discussion on this episode of The Bad Batch. Come back next week, Friday, where we will be talking about The Bad Batch, and maybe we'll talk about Superman and Lois instead, because Tristan's just getting into it. I've been watching it since it started.
I'm liking it pretty good.
What episode are you on?
I just got I'm just finished the second episode.
Okay.
I'm pretty into it. I watched when the pilot was on. I watched like 10 minutes, and I was like, okay, no, I'm not really into this right now. And I came back to it after you were going on about it, and I'm liking it a lot. So I'm into watching at least what's on and not right now for the first season.
Yeah, it's a different take on Superman. I mean, it's the similar Superman we've seen in the comics and stuff, but it's a different like time frame in his life that we've never really explored. So if you're a Superman fan, I suggest checking it out. But yeah, that's the end of our Bad Batch. Come check us out next Friday and stick around. We'll be on in about 15 minutes to watch The Phantom Menace. And if you're watching this on playback or on YouTube or on podcast form, then go find our Phantom Menace watch along / drink along. We'll be having a few beers and laughing at the badness of this movie. So
wish us luck.
Have a nice night.
See ya.